Good afternoon to our loyal listeners. Welcome to Let's Start Justice, the program of Jamaicans for Justice. I am the Executive Director, Michael Jackson.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
No, I want to keep saying that our listenership is certainly growing and we appreciate you tuning in. And I think this is such an important program as the public is educated on the issues that affect you, your rights, understand the different legislation that the Parliament is contemplating, so you know the implications that it would have for you and how you go about your daily lives. Now, as usual, Jade, we're going to start with the human rights issues of the week. The most glaring is the declaration of the state of public emergency, but I would leave that for a little bit. Right? Now, for those who have been following our pages, and you heard us last week saying that we're going to be speaking to Parliament, the Joint Select Committee on the bail bill, and we made our submission known that we believe that the pre-charge bail provision within the bail bill ought to be struck. But we indicated to the Joint Select Committee that if they do not accept that recommendation, certainly we were asking for certain amendments to be made to the current format. Right. So we're just encouraging persons to follow our Twitter page, and you will see, or our Instagram as well, and you will see some concerns that we have around the bail bill. And certainly you can go on the PBC YouTube page and you will get a sense of what we had presented to the Joint Select Committee. Now, there are two other major issues that I want to touch on, and I'm going to ask the youth voice beside me. She keeps reminding me that I'm old. But Senator Damian Crawford has made a call that the age of consent should move from 16 to 18 years old. What's your take on that?
I think we have greater things to focus on when it comes to even if we're going to focus on sexual exposure, the early sexual exposure of our youth, than making a push for criminalization, which is essentially what this would be doing.
Exactly.
And we have acknowledged that in our cultural landscape, children are exposed to sexual activity very early. So what we need to be looking at is how can we manage this exposure? How can we protect our children from certain kinds of abuses?
Sex education needed more.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we have to assume that with the information, our children will be able to make the right decisions. I think where our focus has to be on education. I know one of our advocacy points at JFJ was a close-in age exemption. I think that should be a main focus if we're going to be talking about...
And to be fair to the Joint Select Committee, in their 2018 report, they did indicate that they would be accepting that recommendation.
Right, but we're in 2022.
And
going into 23. So I should hope that that indication would become fulsome in the coming year, and we actually see those legislative changes.
Thank you. Now, there are two things I want to also touch on. And JFJ, we have been in the media for the past week, wherein, let me start with the lesser of the two. Now, Senator Matthew Samuda, in a recent Senate sitting, pushed back against a criticism that has been levied by Jamaicans for Justice and others, that the proposed mandatory minimum of 30 years for murder will in fact impede on the judicial discretion that currently exists for the courts to really consider a case-by-case basis of what is before the courts. For example, we saw the young boy there who had killed another student. Unfortunate situation. He got 4 years and 10 months. And I understand persons are saying, understandably so, is it too low? But the court really has to assess
absolutely
the circumstances before. But I want to let people know that the existing penalty within the sentencing guidelines for murder is actually life imprisonment. It's just that the current mandatory minimum starts at 15 years. But what it really does is to allow the judge to look at the circumstances before it and say, I think you should get X amount. And in most instances, when you look at the average sentences put forward, it averages out about a 30-year.
No, absolutely.
So I don't understand. And I urge the executive to put forward evidence to support its legislative amendments.
And I would just like to add to that point, in particular regarding the young man, is that he was actually charged for manslaughter.
Exactly.
He was not charged for murder, and therefore that would account significantly for the kind of sentence he would have received. And when we consider these charges, we have to consider that they're based in the evidence that the police was able to present, and not the courts that decide what he's charged with.
And social media outcry. My last comment to make, I've been seeing several public officials making statements in the public space about Jamaicans for Justice, our position on the state of public emergency, and whether or not we are, well, let me use the language. Minister Juliet Cuthbert-Flynn on Twitter said that JFJ is a joke because of our support for state of emergency, or against state of emergency being utilized as a crime-fighting measure. I also heard Minister of Local Government asking where are the human rights groups. And by the way, that question was asked because a firefighter, unfortunately, was killed in a motor vehicle accident. So I think it's a couple of things that ought to be looked at. The role of human rights groups is to ensure that those human rights violations of citizens, especially by the state, JFJ in particular, that is when we speak. The Jamaica Constabulary Force, their role is to investigate. That's not a JFJ position. I also want to address Minister Cuthbert-Flynn, because I think when we make certain utterances, I understand we have the best of intention. We have to be careful about that narrative, that just because you do not want the state of public emergency to be utilized as a crime-fighting measure, you are somehow supporting criminality. I want to reject that call and that statement by every single public officials. I listened to the Prime Minister this morning, and I don't know if his statement was directed to the opposition. But we have to still be careful. We can't be saying because you oppose, you're somehow not saving lives. It's a dangerous statement to make, and I think we must reject it. Opposing the state of public emergency does not support criminality. And I would urge public officials not to keep repeating what, quite frankly, is a nonsensical statement to make. And I want to urge and remind those persons that when JFJ speak, our work speak for itself. It does. And I will perhaps share some quick data. I know I'm running over time. In 2021, JFJ supported, or since 2020, we have supported over 80 women who were abused by their partners. And that falls within our grant within the HIV sector, which Minister Cuthbert-Flynn is the state minister. I want to also advise that within the same HIV sector, JFJ supported over 50 persons living with and affected by HIV who have faced discrimination. We supported over 100 persons who are marginalized people in getting legal representation. So let's not disregard the work of the organization simply because there is a difference of opinion on something. Let's have more respectful discourse when we're discussing crime. And I'm still saying that's a nonsensical argument, and whether or not it's unintentional, what public officials are doing is almost threatening that civic space and accountability that is being given by organizations such as JFJ. Over to you, Jade.
Of course, we can always count on Mikkel to give us a passionate opening for the show. And I support the comments that were made. Yes, but we'll go straight into a more lighthearted part of the discussion where we do our right of the day and we do our trivia question. So this right of the day this week is very much in keeping with the presentation we would have made regarding the new bail bill. Again, I urge those who haven't seen it to go and watch. And we also have an episode on that you can look back at on our YouTube page. But today we're talking about the presumption of innocence. And this is under your constitution, under your right to due process. And it states that every person who is charged with a criminal offense shall be presumed innocent until he is proved guilty or has pleaded guilty, and will be entitled to defend himself in person or through legal representation of his own choosing, or if he has not sufficient means to pay for legal representation, to be given assistance as is required in the interests of justice. And this presumption of innocence is one that we are worried is being threatened with the new pre-charge provisions under the bail bill. And this week, our trivia question, which Mikkel may have given the answer to if you were listening, but possibly you didn't hear. So what was the Prime Minister's suggestion for the new mandatory minimum sentence for committing a murder? So you can respond to our trivia question by sending in a WhatsApp at 876-239-7583, or you can give us a call in studio at 876-676-4996. And this show will have a call-in segment, so listen out for when you are able to call in at 676-4996. So we will go straight into this week's topic, which is again poignant. We are discussing the solutions to crime prevention and control. So, according to statistics coming from the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the murder rate for the period leading up to November 28, 2022 totals to about 1,395 murders. This is increased from the same period in 2021, where numbers totaled 1,338 across all 14 parishes.
Now, we're aware that the government of Jamaica has been utilizing the state of public emergency since January 2018, and we had one that was declared on November 15th, and it went up to November 29th. Now, if we also recall, the opposition had opted not to support that extension request made from the government. Now, just this morning, the Prime Minister, Andrew Holness, declared another state of public emergency. So in other words, the one that ended 29th, today is now December 6th. Mm-hmm. So exactly 1 week later, after the soldiers and the police packed up from these areas, the Prime Minister declared another SOE and adding one parish to it. So SOEs are now declared in St. Anne, Clarendon, St. Catherine, St. James, Hanover, Westmoreland, and different areas in Kingston and St. Andrew.
The Zones of Special Operations Act used to implement these extraordinary measures makes provisions for the use of body cameras by the joint force, as well as the implementation of social interventions in the communities that will be governed by these measures. To date, we have not received any updates on the implementation of body cameras. And as for social interventions, the Minister of National Security, Dr. Horace Chang, would have stated that these interventions are too expensive for implementation, a sentiment that was echoed by Senator Matthew Samuda in a recent sitting of the Senate.
Now, you can imagine that critics that are against the SOEs and the ZOZOs in an extended period, as we have been seeing, we have called about the lack of data around the effectiveness and the lack of indication about where we are with the implementation of these measures. And there have been several calls and proposals around different crime fighting measures to prevent crime and to control crime that have been made in recent times. We're going to take a break, but when we return, we're going to be joined by Mr. Horace Levy, who is a criminologist, and Dr. Leakim Samaj, who is a psychologist, and what we can do as a country to address the crime here in Jamaica. We'll take the break and return. Good afternoon and welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We're discussing exploring solutions to crime prevention and control measures. And we're joined by Dr. Leakim Samaj, who is a psychologist, and Mr. Horace Levy, a criminologist. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having me. Horace here.
Dr. Samaj, you're with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Welcome to the program. Mr. Levy is a family member of JFJ, but welcome, Mr. Levy.
Thank you.
All right. So, Dr. Samaj, let me start with you. You indicated that we need to treat crime as a public health issue. Can you explain to us what that means?
Well, the fact that the way public health issues work, you start off with a disease. There's an input, and it starts one area, and there are things that cause it to spread, and it keeps spreading until it is curtailed, or the causal element that are driving it are suppressed or transformed or treated. Treating the symptoms do not allow a disease to go away. you have to actually look at some of the causal element. And a number of countries and regions of countries that have actually taken this approach have brought about some significant reduction in violence and criminal activity, including murder.
Treating it as a disease, and so on. I think for the causal issues that you mentioned, before we segue to you, Mr. Levy, back to you, Dr. Samaj, what are some of those underlying issues that you have seen based on your experience?
Well, look, the biggest one is the tribal politics in Jamaica. The inadequate socialization of many of our young people, because there are forces at work that give them reasons to believe that working within the legal parameters is not in their best interest, and they get rewarded for going outside of those parameters. So a lot of things to do with socialization and child development. The way our criminal justice system work, or should I say does not work, does not help the process either. So one needs to find a way to deal with all of these at the same time. Young people, this saying that the devil finds work for idle hands.
Yes.
If we don't have options that provides mechanisms where young people, especially young men, are not being socialized into pro-social activity, the antisocial and destructive forces actively recruit them and support them and condition them into a life of criminality. So unless we're willing to do all of these things, even though they're expensive, but guess what? The data shows us that everything we can take off our murder rate, the equivalent percentages and numbers could actually end up on our GDP. And if all we are thinking about is punitive capabilities, such as states of emergencies and so on, there's a basic psychological truth that punishment does not change behavior. What punishment does, it temporarily suppresses the behavior or displaces the behavior. So that's a truth, that's a given. So unless we're willing to do the other things, the heavy lifting, the long things that need to be done, we will get the same results. About 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I approached the Ministry of Education with a program that would work with some of the 12 to 15 boys in almost every high school who were in what I call the departure lounge, to help to reverse the process at that level. I was told that they have no budget for that. I warned them that, look, if you don't find the budget for this, what you'll end up doing is just shifting the burden from the Ministry of Education to the Ministry of National Security and Justice plus GCT. We're there now.
Yes. And just to add to that before Jade comes in, when you look at the budget of the Ministry of Justice versus that of the Ministry of Education versus that of the Ministry of National Security, you're talking about, for example, the national security budget is $100 billion compared to Ministry of Justice, that's just about $10 billion. Just to put some statistics and information to what Dr. Samaj just indicated. Over to you, Jade.
Right, thank you, Dr. Samaj. My question is towards Mr. Levy, though. I hear Dr. Samaj talking about the causality point, and I wonder what, if any, implementation of a criminologist's expertise would have been used to help to identify some of these issues, because when we hear the government talking about how they've decided to implement certain measures, there is an indication that there has been some level of research and analysis that has been done as to the state of the situation. So I wonder if Mr. Levy has any information on that front.
Well, thank you for calling me a criminologist, but that dignifies me. Puts me at a level way above where I actually am. I've been only a social worker, lowly paid, underpaid, and lowly regarded, at the bottom of the ladder in social incompetencies. Before I answer your queries, though, Jade, I would love to ask. I'm very much inclined to accept everything that Leah Kim is putting forward, Dr. Samaj. But I only want to ask him one question, and that is, what makes violence or murder an illness, a disease, rather than something else? What is it about diseases that encompass violence and murders? What is an illness anyway, to begin with? Can I ask you, Leah Kim?
Well,
I'm
two
just
things.
asking, I'm not.
No, please go ahead, because we actually had that question, Mr. Levy. So please go ahead, Dr. Samaj.
Disease is, by definition, disorder. Something that is working against the ordered process in anything, in life in general. And it is something that transforms the normative function of a living entity. It spreads from one to another, and you learn it, you engage it, you quote unquote catch it, so to speak. So that by using the same thing, whether you're talking about a virus or a behavior. By the way, emotions are more contagious than any known virus. Just think about it, emotions. You walk into a room and there's a vibe, everybody laughing and having a good time. You automatically start laughing.
What's more contagious? I didn't catch what it was that's more contagious than anything else.
Emotions. Just how the people around you are feeling.
Yeah.
The emotions that they're expressing. You find yourself doing the same thing, thinking the same thought. Just think of what happens when, even at a football match, where everybody in the area start doing the same thing. You grieve together, you laugh together. So certain communities, when certain behaviors take root in a community, it becomes literally rooted. It is my feeling that many sectors of Jamaican society, and this may sound a little harsh, telling the truth and being honest are acquired traits. It is not normative. It is assumed that you only do these things if you're forced to or if you have to. Because their socialization did not tell them that you're supposed. Look what happens in Jamaica when a truck breaks down on the road. There's an accident.
I think Mr. Levy wants to come in 1 second.
Leah Kim, you started off by classifying an illness as a disorder. But disorders occur at every level, in every category of human living. Right? Disorders, there can be a disorder in the way taxi drivers behave. It doesn't make it an illness, a disease, does it? There's a disorder, there can be a disorder in the way the British might work out their heritage. But that doesn't make it a disease, a medical disease.
No, by no means. It's not medical. All we're saying is that...
What kind of disorder makes it a medical disorder? Something that's treated by doctors and nurses? And is it a disorder, a psychological or physiological disorder?
No, we're not saying it's a medical disorder, We're saying that this disorder is best treated as you would any other public health issue. So that
what makes it public health? That's the question.
Oh, because, listen, anything that impacts on the life of people, clearly that's the ultimate impact on our health.
So let me ask Mr. Levy, as a sociologist, social worker, since you won't accept our grand title of criminologist, is it your perspective that perhaps this is a social disorder? And what would you propose would deal with it?
Yeah, undoubtedly it's a social disorder. I was only trying to find out what makes it a socially medical disorder. But it's
never said medical, just a public health disorder. Clearly it is social and psychological in its handling, not medical, not medicinal.
Well, what makes it a public health disorder then? What makes it a public health disorder? Anyway,
Because
Well,
I'm
I
sure
think
some of the
that's
solutions perhaps that you both have will coincide at some point. So, Mr.
well, no,
Levy?
for me, for example, in my mind, the two main things that governments are responsible for are to provide the growth of the economic opportunities in a society and maintaining public order. Hmm? Maintaining public order in the broad sense of the word, how we settle disputes, how we settle differences, how we use public spaces. There's a model that I work with that says that any human behavior that takes place in the public arena, if not regulated, will ultimately have to be subsidized. So once a behavior starts in the public arena, if we do not regulate it and contain it, for example, just how we use the road, what do traffic lights stand for, what side of the road we drive on, if we do not regulate that, then we're going to have to subsidize it because some strange things are going to be happening. So,
gentlemen, we have to take a break at this time, and then I'm going to ask you both to just stay with us until about 1:40. Let us take the break and return.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Today we are exploring solutions to crime prevention and control. We are joined by Dr. Leah Kim Semaj and Mr. Horace Levy. Before we took the break, there was a debate happening regarding what is a public health issue versus a social issue, but I really just want to focus on the solution side of the conversation. So, Mr. Levy, again, I ask, what do you think would be the kind of solutions we should be looking towards to address some of the issues we're facing?
Well, when I look at the backdrop of what's happened in Jamaica, I find two solutions have been put forward. The first one was put forward by Hugh Shearer in the 60s and Michael Mann in the 70s. And this was to go to the police to solve a crime surge that was happening in each case. Different kinds of crime surges, but they were both crime. And they went to the police and to suppressing it by a red fence and a law Michael brought in, which had to be revoked later on. But then there was the alternative was put forward amazingly by P.J. Patterson in the 90s. He went and asked academics and a judge, the Chief Justice at the time, Leslie Wolf, and civil society to give him a diagnosis of what the problem was. That was in 1992, and then he followed it up with two national committees in 96 and 2002, I think it was. And all three of these committees came up with the identical answer. They said there are two things you must do to resolve the crime. One is to reform the police, and the other one is to uplift the community people out of the deprivation they're suffering. And then that same solution was offered by the West Indies Commission in their report in 2016. Unfortunately, P.J. Patterson never followed up to do anything about it. And not a single prime minister in Jamaica has ever done anything about those two. So I shouldn't say that. They've done something.
Mr. Levy, I'm not to interrupt you, but I just wanted to zone in on the reform of the police point. What exactly would that look like?
Just walk us through some of the key recommendations. I recall reading that Wolf report that Mr. Levy mentioned.
Yeah, well, I mean, the updated one, the West Indies Commission recommended body cameras, which I heard you mention earlier on, as one. They recommended a complete overhaul of the that particular section of the police force, which finally has been removed, in fact, entirely cut out of the police force. They recommended a complete, a radical transformation of the police force, and they recommended and they heavily criticized the leadership of the police force. In fact, they said they would have brought adverse judgments against both the top police person and the top army person, but for the fact they both were retired at the time. This is what they said in actually chapter 15 of that report.
Yes.
So it would start from the very top to remove corrupt police officers, officers who are selling out to the criminals, and would bring in reforms about the way reporting is done. Some of these Indicom have brought forward already to recommend strongly, for example, that for the control of guns, that they should be assigned to particular police, or the particular policeman should have a particular gun that he reports on, or it should be identified when it's handed out to him as having handed out to him, and so on. So there are very specific control measures which can be put in place. The whole method of keeping record of what goes on in the police force. A huge number of reforms that need to go on. Now, some of these have been touched on and dealt with partially, but for example, body cameras still is outstanding in a particular number, right? What's happened to that? Going into communities wearing masks, that was specifically denounced by the West Indies Commission. So there's, you want a longer list? I mean, I'm sorry, I don't have one written down in front of me. But there are lots of specific things that could be done. There are too many, for example, high up, too many assistant commissioners and deputy commissioners. We don't need that number, right? Police forces around the world have one or two. We have about 6 or 7, right? Assistant or deputy commissioners, drawing nice fat salaries to be sure, while low-paid police, that's another reform that needs to go on. Police need to be paid properly, paid on time, paid for overtime, right? The police have had to bring the government to court to try to get some action.
And I think there's a current matter being litigated now, Mr. Levy,
Precisely.
where the police, they're demanding better overtime payment as well as better wages. And
Precisely.
currently with the wage negotiation, that is something I heard the Police Federation speaking to.
Yes, and it shouldn't have to come to this, and the police have to take up action like this.
Yes.
What's wrong with the government?
But beyond wage though, Mr. Levy, Corporal Rohan James, who we had hoped would have been here with us today, he indicated publicly that apparently the police officers, the rank and file, they don't have basic amenities to do their work. For example, they have to be using their personal cell phones to communicate with each other when they're out in the communities facing all sorts of criminals. Do you have any position on that particular issue?
Well, no, I fully agree with him. How can one disagree with police having to use their personal equipment? The state should be providing these, should be paying them, should be making sure they have an adequate food when they're out there, which they've been deprived of. But I would like to turn to the other element from the police reform, because it's clear that very little has been done. The other element is the deprivation of communities, lifting deprived and oppressed communities out of the deprivation they suffer from. The removal of opportunities to young people, right, as a result of this deprivation, right? That has multiple components to it, community elements. It has a component of treating the youth in particular who are lacking in these opportunities, to meet with them, listen to them, learn what it is of interest to them, learn that they want work, they want training, they want opportunities to get ahead, right? But there are also older people in the community who need to be trained, retrained in exercising their leadership. And then there are the very young in the community, 6 and 7-year-olds and even younger, who are traumatized by the violence, right? They need to be addressed. Their needs to be addressed, right? So there are multiple needs in the communities, right? These youth who are being beaten by their mothers very often, most of their mothers, from the time they can barely talk, and even before they can talk, they're being slapped and manhandled, right? And treated ill by the police as well. You beat them, you suppress them, and the violence breaks out again,
So,
precisely as a direct result of that kind of thing.
so Mr. Levy, I hear Mr. Levy bringing up so many issues, and I
So
wonder.
that's why I bring them up.
No, but I hear you say you're a social worker, and so I can see where a social worker could fit in these conversations about restructuring and rehabilitation, and I consider some of the issues you would have brought up. I can see where maybe a psychologist, but I'm not a psychologist. I don't know if I'm accurately assigning this responsibility, but I can see where maybe a psychologist could be part of those interventions. So I wonder if Dr. Yeah, so Dr. Semaj, what are your thoughts on?
I've called repeatedly for an army of social workers and for many more psychiatrists and psychologists in there. Anyway, so you're going to ask Dr. Semaj something.
Yes. Yes, I wonder if he has had any sort of experience in working in that kind of community intervention / community policing joint effort. And if not, where does he see his role or the role of a psychologist in these issues?
No, it is what was just expressed a while ago was quite profound, in terms of that, what happens on the ground from the social worker, what the social worker is able to pick up. My daughter went to her undergraduate degree in social work. And before she was finished, she said, "Daddy, this is not going to work. I have to go to law school." Because she realized that the limitations of what the social worker is experiencing and trying to get changes. Oh, by the way, she's now a Supreme Court judge in New York. And the kind of consciousness that when she was being sworn in, first of all, as a civil court judge, she told the entire gathering that she has more experience than all the judges present. Because as a social worker, and then as a family court lawyer, she was the one, and then a family court judge, she was the one that went into people's homes and into the communities. And she asked many of the judges, "Have you ever been to any of the people's homes? Have you ever observed firsthand?" So I deeply understand what Mr. Levy was just expressing. Now, in my case, though, look, I am not a public officer. I operate a company for the last 35 years. And I only, they were saying in Jamaica, where dogs are not invited, bones are not provided. So I've written columns, I have hosted radio programs and television programs, and even in the context where I have, in fact, once I was invited by the Ministry of National Security to look at the options, that how could they give the judges more options to work with, because the judges realizing that the limitations of just what they were and what they wanted to be able to use psychometric testing and psychological assessments to guide their thinking. And we did an incredible intervention to show how it could be done, because there are times when the judges realize that the options, that the tools that they have, a number of times judges have referred persons to me in lieu of going straight to sentencing, because they realize that sending this person to prison is not really the solution. They need to look at some other things before. Can they bring about some transformation before? So yes, there's a significant role for psychological input and psychiatric input. My recommendations also need psychosocial support for victims, because once you have in crime and violence, victims carry this on. Mr. Levy mentioned in terms of how the children who are so brutalized by their parents and so on. One of the incredible things about corporal punishment, somebody growing up experiencing corporal punishment, one of two things happen to you. One, you pass it on because somebody did grow up and you see it doesn't happen to me, or you never do it. My mother was a terrorist, and I swear that I would never put my hand on my children. I have never hit my children in any way, form, and them turn out good. Huh? But we believe in corporal punishment, this country. We believe in, and so children who experience this, The data is also telling us that the level of father absence in many of our communities almost directly correlate with the prison population. The ultimate cadre, mother can draw on her son, is pointing and saying, wait till your father come home. Most mothers can't do that. There's a condition known as opposition defiance disorder.
Dr. Samaj, I'm going to have to just give you 20 more seconds because we have to leave it here.
Yeah,
just to close that thought.
Young men, they learn to take control of their behaviors. And if that does not happen in that early adolescence, it's hard for it to happen later on, because any form of authority, whether a teacher, whether a policeman, whether a security, that speaks to them, immediately they have to push back. Okay. So we have serious problems.
Thank you so much, Mr. Horace Levy and Dr. Leakim Samaj for joining us on the Let's Start Justice program.
Aren't you going to give me 20 seconds too?
Please, Dr. Well, I said Dr. Levy, but please, Mr. Levy, go ahead. Go ahead with your 20 seconds, Mr. Levy.
All right, my 20 seconds is to ask you and Dr. Samaj a question, which I'd like you to answer publicly. Not now necessarily, but at some point. What is the reason why the Prime Minister stubbornly sticks to SOEs? Why is he doing it? What's going on in his mind? Answer that question publicly first.
You want what appears to be immediate results. Punishment suppresses behavior in the presence of the punishing agent, but it does not change behavior. Fact. You want something to happen immediately, but in the long run, it makes things worse. A lot of people go to prison, come out better criminals.
That doesn't answer his psychological question.
I think we're going to have to put that question publicly to the Prime Minister. All right, thank you, gentlemen. We'll take a break.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We are continuing our conversation this week on exploring solutions to crime prevention and control. Mikel, what were you getting out of our conversation with the learned gentleman?
There are several things that were said, and I do agree with both gentlemen. Whether or not you're addressing this from a public health perspective or from a criminal justice system, socialist or socialism or social order perspective, rather. I don't know why social institution terminology in my head. But whether or not you are talking from a public health or social order perspective, I think the interventions, for the most part, they're quite aligned. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when Dr. Samaj spoke, I think there are several underlying causes of crime that must be addressed. You're talking about poverty. You're talking about socialization, how we interact with each other. Those things are important. And my disappointment in all of this conversation from the government is that when you put forward these solutions, you're told that it's too long term, it's too expensive. But at what point do you start? Remember, Jade, we have been down this road before.
Absolutely.
1974, gun court. And you're talking about indefinite detention, ruled unconstitutional. 2010, state of emergency. I think the absence of the government led to that situation, and I mean decades worth, where the government did not put sufficient measures in place, where the gangs then became that place of refuge for our youngsters, and then Adudus came about. Then fast track to 2010, anti-crime bills. And we're having that conversation about the bill again. So it's like a cycle, never-ending cycle, where the government clearly is not learning. And by the way, if the crime rate was low in the 70s and you did all of that, clearly these things are not working. So when do you deal with the underlying issues? Fix the system. We talk about witness protection, you hear that it's too expensive. It can't be done to the way that we're talking about. So if everything is too expensive, then why are we talking here? I don't understand.
You know what I would say? Prior to when these measures, this current version that we've been under of some variation of since late 2017, early 2018, came about, my understanding of it was that it would be a temporary measure, whilst the long-term measures.
Oh, that's what you understood?
That was what was communicated.
Oh, the Prime Minister had actually said to the public in 2019 that he intended to use the SOE for 7 years. So I think he's merely fulfilling his promise.
I see. Well, based on my understanding of even the legislation itself, the provisions for social intervention and for all of those kind of accountability measures even implies within its construction that it is to be a temporary.
Very clearly, but remember, Jade, if you're starting from the place of the Constitution, it says 40 days if you're in war with another country, if the country locked down all its social institutions.
Michael, I am aware of what the Constitution provisions are.
I don't understand. And I see people tearing us apart on social media saying, and I see a message coming in from one of our listeners, that we have a lot of criminals. And we agree. But let us look at things in very practical terms. Yes? The SOE has been in place since 2018. It has been extended. We're in this current round of SOEs, well, not this current one, but one of them declared under the current administration, was the longest run SOE. Mm-hmm. It beat the one in 1976 that saw several members from the then ruling party detained by the former administration under the PNP-led government, yes? And it went as long as 1 year and 3 months. Mm-hmm. Clearly, it's not working. And let me say this. Putting social media posts that SOE saves lives does not answer the critical questions. How many of those that have been detained have seen charges laid against them? How many of those who have had charges brought against them have secured conviction? And I can answer that question. So let me start with the OPD report, Office of the Public Defender in 2018. Over 10,000 people detained and only 5% saw any charges whatsoever. And by the way, we don't hear one conviction rate yet.
Right.
The current SOE that ended in November 29, we were told that 325 persons were detained. Mm-hmm. And 85% of them were released. Mm-hmm. So clearly this is just scrape and go. And yet you have your police officers now who should be out there doing criminal investigation, want to be out there actually securing conviction, can't do their work because guess what? You're mandated to be sticking in these 7 to 8 parishes. Come on.
And again, I have to say that one of the major concerns is the lack of implementation of what are long-term measures. We have called SOEs, but we have not seen what is our long-term way to tackle what has been and continues to be a prolific issue where crime is concerned. I am seeing another comment from one of our listeners saying there cannot be a crime plan. Criminals in Parliament. Look how many got caught up in corruption in Parliament. Well, I mean, we cannot control what the public perception of their public officials are.
But we would urge public officials that they need to do a little bit better where that is concerned.
But as far as we look forward to hearing what the crime plan is. I believe the Prime Minister...
The government said it, Jade. Why are you doing that?
Mikhail?
The government said the crime plan is Enhanced Security Measures Act that will have control orders, that will have special detention orders, and that will see people arbitrarily arrested and detained. It's going to be supported by the bail bill that will have pre-charge bail and pre-charge detention. Why are you saying that the government
One can only hope that through the advocacy of organizations like ours and voices like Dr. Semaj and Mr. Levy and those who are urging the government to look at what is the data, what are the statistics as to how these enhanced measures end up working. And hopefully with that analysis, we can see something that would be more effective in a long-term manner, and less of an affront to the rights of our citizens. So that's what we hope. Absolutely. I am looking to my producer repeatedly for a winner to my trivia, but I'm seeing no winner this week. which is unfortunate because that means we were not here at the beginning of the show to have heard my co-anchor give the answer mistakenly. However, the response to the question is actually 30 years. So the question was, what was the mandatory minimum that the Prime Minister had suggested? And that new mandatory minimum that was suggested would have been 30 years, coming up from 15, which is what is in the Offences Against the Person Act currently. Mikkel,
So
we
we're
are out of time.
Yes, and I don't want Nikki Z to be upset with us this week. So thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week. I'm Mikkel Jackson, Executive Director.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at Jamaicans for Justice. Thanks for joining us.